Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Bassam Zawadi, and I pray that all of you and your families are safe and well. Many of you heard about Dr. Yasir Qadhi's recent video on the notion of Ibadah and the Najdi Da'wah, which he uploaded on his YouTube channel on February 8th, 2021, last week. He primarily touched upon why he left the Atharis school. He also discussed the notion of Ibadah and tried to contrast between the stance of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. He also spent a good amount of time criticizing Ibn Abdul Wahhab and the Najdi Da'wah. So, inshallah, I'll be offering a few remarks, and I'll try my best to not take too much of your time. And I do want to say, before I begin, that this video may come across as being more directed towards Atharis, as some of the assumptions underlying much of what I say presumes that. Moreover, there will be certain things that I will not be determined to discuss and address in detail, as they are things which are already well established in the Athari school. Nevertheless, everyone is free to listen and benefit, inshallah. So, the first thing to discuss is Ibadah. What is Ibadah? When does a certain act or utterance constitute Ibadah? Now, we could start off by offering a very simplified response to that question by saying that Ibadah is anything, be it an act, speech, or action of the heart, that should only be directed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and none other than Him. Now, that is a fairly uncontroversial definition, which nobody would really disagree with. Now, however, just like with any definition or foundational principle or maxim, once you begin to probe and you begin to get forced to articulate yourself better and provide more clarity to the terms and principles that you adopt. So, again, what really is Ibadah? Now, the majority of classical linguists and scholars have defined Ibadah as that conscious or intentional state or frame of mind which constitutes feelings of utmost humility and submission, and those feelings go on to stir that individual to cling on to something or somebody, and to submit to its will and perform actions to please it, or the person. Now, what do we mean by utmost humility and utmost submission? Well, they are those actions or utterances or actions of the heart which are expressions of servitude and praise only owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is to establish a relationship, whether continuously or temporarily, with somebody or something in a manner only worthy of establishing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once again, how do we identify what those actions and utterances are? Well, here we need to look to the Qur'an and Sunnah and see how the ulama have understood them and try to weigh and consider the differences of opinion on the matter. Now, when it comes to Ibadah, we can break Ibadah down into two different categories. First category are those acts that are inherently Ibadah. They are unconditionally Ibadah. And the second category are acts that are conditionally Ibadah. So, looking at the first one, acts that are inherently Ibadah. Now, these are inherently expressions of utmost servitude and utmost humility, being directed they are expressions of utmost humility and servitude when they are being directed to a being. So, for example, acts which are uniquely known through Islamic teachings, like, for example, the 5 salawat, Hajj and Umrah as complete sets with all their components, fasting in Ramadan, etc. So these are inherently acts of ibadah, regardless of what your intention is when you direct these acts to somebody. So, for example, let's say that you have a wealthy and arrogant hater of Islam. Okay, let's call him Kevin. Okay, let's say Kevin comes up to a Muslim and he says to him, I want you to make wudu and I want you to pray in the same exact manner as you do to your God, Allah, but to me. And I want you to openly declare your intention that you direct your Maghrib Salah to me, Kevin. And in return, I'll give you $1 million. Right? So here, in this hypothetical scenario, the Muslim says to himself, okay, let me do that, and because I want to get the money. He's speaking purely out of greed, and I can make tawbah later because Allah Ghafurun Rahim. And he made wudu, openly declared, I am directing my Maghrib Salah to Kevin, and he did it. Now here, the Muslim did not intend to take Kevin as a god. He did not intend in his heart to worship Kevin. All he really wanted was the $1 million. But he willingly, openly declared that he is directing his salah to his Maghrib Salah to Kevin. Is this an act of major shirk? The answer is absolutely yes. Other acts which are inherently ibadah are involve actions or utterances which presume that the object of veneration or invoking or dua has characteristics or abilities which only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. So, for example, examples which the ulama mention are things like forgiveness of sins, granting hidayah, legislation of what is halal and haram, etc. So, unlike salah and hajj, these things are not unique to Islam because other religions have this understanding of istighfar and divine guidance and so on. So they aren't unique to Islam, but still, no one could forgive your sins in a manner in which they are wiped off the scales weighing your deeds other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Period. Full stop. And so if somebody were to say that God assigned somebody to, assign somebody the full discretional authority to forgive people's sins, and as a result, we make tawbah to that somebody and repent to that somebody, believing that God gave him this authority to forgive sins, this is still an act of major shirk. Why? Because forgiveness of sins is from the khasa'is al-rububiyyah. It is something which only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. Similarly, legislation of what is morally and ethically halal and haram. The Qur'an in Surah At-Tawbah, ayah 31, accused the Jews and Christians of taking their rabbis and priests as lords, with Allah. And the Jews and Christians, they do not believe that their priests and their rabbis independently legislate what is halal and haram for them. if you take the Catholics, for example, they believe that Peter, the apostle of Christ, was the first pope, and that he had authority from Christ to legislate what is halal and haram. They appeal to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 19, and in order to prove this, and they believe that this authority was transmitted down from Peter to every pope that came after him. So even though they did not believe that their rabbis, even though they do not believe that their rabbis and their priests, act independently of God's will, the mere fact that they believe that their rabbis and priests legislate, were given the authority to legislate what is halal and haram for them, according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, entails that they treated them as lords. And this is despite them not intending to take them as lords. Now, it's very important that we understand that this is what Jews and Christians believe. Any Jew or Christian that you speak to will say, yeah, of course, we believe that God gave them the authority to legislate what is halal and haram for us. Yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declared that to be shirk. And obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understands the beliefs of these Jews and Christians. Now, this is the first category of ibadah. So these are acts and utterances and actions of the heart, which are inherently ibadah, regardless of what you believe about the one or thing you're directing these acts to. The second category are conditional acts of ibadah. So these are acts which only amount to ibadah if they are accompanied by certain conditions. So let's take sujood, for example. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and several others, probably most scholars, I believe, were of the view that sujood is a conditional act of ibadah. Why? Because, in their view, sujood is a kind of subservience, a kind of submission, not inherently the ultimate and utmost kind of submission. For example, you have sujood of respect, and you have sujood of greeting, sujood, tahiyya, right? So now, obviously, that doesn't mean that that prostrations to Allah, to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are halal in our sharia, but they're not unconditionally major acts of shirk either. Now, when does sujood amount to an act of worship? Well, scholars would look at a number of factors which would serve as indicators as to whether the sajda in question, was performed in a manner of utmost servitude and humility. So, for example, if the sajda could become ibadah if the person intended to direct it toward an entity he believed to be divine. Now, that's a simple and clear scenario. Everybody agrees with this. This is fairly uncontroversial. But let's think about another scenario. Another indicator that sajda amounts to ibadah is if it's performed to entities that are not known by custom to be a sajda of greeting or a sajda of mere respect. So, for example, making sujood to the sun and the moon and the planets. This is major shirk, and this is even if the person making the sajda does not affirm that the sun, moon, and planets are God. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah has an interesting statement in his Dar' al-Ta'arud Bayn al-Aql wal-Naql, volume 1, pages 227 to 228. He states, and I quote, "From among the followers of the polytheists is one who prostrates to the sun and the moon and the planets, and calls upon them like he calls upon Allah, and fasts for them, and slaughters for them, and strives to seek closeness to them. And then he proceeds to claim, this is not shirk. Rather, shirk is when one believes that they are the managers of my affairs. But if we make them amins and intercessors, we would not be rendered mushrik. And then Ibn Taymiyyah goes on to say, and it is known by necessity in the religion of Islam that this is shirk. So notice that Shaykh al-Islam, what Shaykh al-Islam is saying here, he's rebuking these people for saying that they are not committing shirk because they don't believe that these entities govern the affairs of creation. An anecdote which an anecdote which relates to this could be read in Ibn Arabi's Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Yes, the controversial Ibn Arabi, in volume 7, page 426. He mentions that he spoke to one of the sun worshippers and inquired about why he and others worship the sun. And the person responded by saying that they don't believe that the sun is God. On the contrary, they believe that the sun is a poor servant of God, abdun faqir. However, they still glorify the sun because they realize that it's a blessing and grace from God to them, and they hope that in worshiping the sun, that the sun would intercede for them. You could also see Imam al-Shahristani's Kitab al-Milal wal-Nihal, where he discusses the beliefs of various religions and sects in Islam. And in his book, he describes the beliefs of sun and moon and water worshippers and a whole host of other belief systems. And when you read those descriptions of their beliefs, you will see that there are various religions and beliefs out there that which teach that people should worship things that they don't even believe to be God. People worship a whole host of things. They worship their dead ancestors. They worship their animal spirits. They worship demons, which is why you have some scholars such as Imam al-Qurtubi saying that seeking refuge in the jinn without Allah could be shirk and kufr. And for example, right? So I mean, the point here is that that one is directing his veneration to entities in which it cannot be said to be something customary and part of a given culture. So yes, we make ruku' to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in some cultures bowing might be a form of greeting. And we make sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in certain customs, making sujood to the king might be a show of great respect. But when it comes to planets and stars and fire, because you have fire worshippers as well, and whatnot, the connotations here are clearly religious in nature. So, as we said, this, as we said, is also an indicator for when a particular conditional act of ibadah, such as sujood, could evolve into ibadah. Another indicator for determining when a conditional act of ibadah, amounts to ibadah, is when the conditional act of ibadah, such as sujood, is directed to an entity which is known to be a god in another belief system. So, for example, it could be a pagan idol, or it could be a statue of Jesus, etc. Right? So here, if one were to direct an act of sajda to these entities, it would still be a major act. It would be a major act of shirk, and that's even if the person that does it is only doing so out of respect. Right? Even if he says, "I'm only doing this out of respect for the religion of others," and I'm only doing it in order to display a great level of tolerance for other faiths, and I'm doing this in the name of religious pluralism, and I don't actually believe in my heart that these are gods, and all these other excuses, it doesn't matter. It's still an act of major shirk. And another indicator to know when the conditional act of ibadah constitutes ibadah is when the act, such as sujood, sticking to the example of sujood, begins to display characteristics and features of other actions which we do know to be ibadah. So, for example, if the sujood to a particular object or person is being done very frequently and is being done with khushu' and with humility and with subservience and with an intention to please and to seek closeness to that object or person, then these all collectively together, serve as a sign that this act has evolved to the status of ibadah. As such kinds of sujood do not exhibit characteristics and features of customary prostrations of greeting and mere respect. Rather, they appear to have escalated to something beyond that. And, for each category of conditional acts of worship, one could identify different indicators. So there might be different indicators to assess when it comes to slaughtering, or seeking refuge, or istighatha, etc. And it is the job of the theologians and the jurists and the judges, who specialize in these issues, to identify these sorts of indicators and parameters for us. So to kind of bring this part of my video to a close, we see that there are two kinds of acts of ibadah. Those acts which are inherently ibadah, such as salah, fasting in Ramadan, seeking forgiveness of sins, asking for hidayah, etc. And then you have those acts which are conditional acts of ibadah. And in that domain of conditional acts of ibadah, you have clear cases and you have gray areas, which may involve a level of ijtihad in determining whether a given act in a specific context has progressed to the level or status of ibadah. And that could only be reliably determined by investigating what the person is doing and why he's doing it. So in light of all this, when Dr. Yasir Qadhi says that an act of veneration towards a given entity could never amount to an act of worship unless the person intends to take that entity as a god, because إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, and that our intentions ultimately influence the label assigned to our actions. We strongly disagree with this, because when it comes to acts that are inherently ibadah, intent to worship is irrelevant at this point. The only thing that is relevant is whether the person intended to perform that act and direct it to that being. That's all that matters. The act itself, if performed, is an act of worship regardless of one's inner intention to take the object as a deity or not. Now, when it comes to conditional acts of ibadah, yes, intentions of taking a deity could play a role in helping us determine whether a conditional act of ibadah has evolved to the level of ibadah. But it's not the only ultimate and decisive factor. For, as I just explained, there are other indicators and factors to consider, and conditional acts of ibadah could evolve into ibadah even if you do not intend to take that object as a deity, because there are people who worship objects without believing that they are God. But it must be noted it must be noted that intent to worship, and intent to take the object as a deity plays a more important role in determining the ruling of the person who engages in these acts. So there is the act, and then there is the actor. And this is something which Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah has spoken about. Ibn Taymiyyah recognized that most Muslims who commit major acts of shirk are severely ignorant and do not intend to worship the saints and objects they are venerating. Let's take a look at a couple of quotes here. Now, in Jami' al-Masail, volume 3, pages 150 to 151, we find Ibn Taymiyyah discussing the kind of shirk which the Meccan polytheists engaged in. And after mentioning that they worship their gods by invoking them and taking them as intercessors, he said the following, and I quote, "If a person is provided the evidence against this type of shirk, and he continues to indulge in it, he is to be executed in the same way a polytheist would be executed. He is not to be buried in a Muslim graveyard, nor is he preyed upon. As for one who is ignorant and knowledge hasn't reached him, and he is unaware of what shirk entails, the type that the Prophet ﷺ fought over against a polytheist, then such an individual is not considered a kafir, especially since this shirk, pay attention to this, especially since this shirk has become rampant among those who claim to be Muslims. However, whoever believes these acts to be an offering and an act of obedience, then such a person is misguided by the agreement of all Muslims. And after the evidence has been established for him, he is considered a kafir." So here Ibn Taymiyyah is saying that the major shirk which the Prophet ﷺ fought the polytheists over, the polytheists of his time, the Meccans, became rampant among those claiming to be Muslims during his time, during Ibn Taymiyyah's time, but due to their ignorance for thinking that their actions don't amount to worship, Ibn Taymiyyah excused them. And he has several statements to this effect. Let me just give one more so that we don't dwell on this single issue for too long. He said in his قاعدة عظيمة في الفرق بين عبادات أهل الإسلام والإيمان وعبادات أهل الشرك والنفاق, page 70, he said, "Among them are those who seek from the dead what they seek from Allah, and say, 'Forgive me, grant me provisions, help me,' and other things like that, similar to what someone praying to Allah says in his salah, of which there is no doubt to anyone who knows the religion that it is contrary to the religion of all messengers. For it is from the shirk which Allah and his messenger prohibited. In fact, it is from the shirk which the Prophet ﷺ fought the polytheists over. Those committing these actions of shirk are to be excused due to their ignorance and due to the evidence not being established for them." And again, in context of this statement, Ibn Taymiyyah is referring to people who claim to be Muslims during his time. So that's Ibn Taymiyyah on excusing Muslims who fall into major shirk out of ignorance. Now, Dr. Yasir Qadhi spoke about Ibn Taymiyyah and argued that his stance was different from that of Ibn Abdul Wahhab. Well, yes in a way, and no in another. In terms of differences between the two on this subject, there are two differences worthy of note. the first difference concerns the notion of excusing the Muslim for his ignorance when he engages in acts of major shirk. Now, both of them, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab, did believe in the principle of excusing people for their ignorance even when they engage in shirk. They both adopted that principle. However, it appears that Ibn Taymiyyah's application of his standards for excusing people for their ignorance was different from Ibn Abdul Wahhab's. For Ibn Taymiyyah, as long as the person genuinely appeared to be ignorant, even after the evidence was provided to that person could still be excused. Why? Well, because one's ignorance may still lead him to falsely reject the evidence provided. Now, and this is even if the person is a scholar, such as al-Bakri, whom Dr. Yasir Qadhi mentioned in his video. And the point is that unless it's clearly demonstrated that the individual is only rejecting the evidence purely out of stubbornness, instead of what outwardly appears to be sincere confusion on his part, the excuse for ignorance stands for Ibn Taymiyyah, because it's possible that the person providing the evidence did not do a sufficient job in providing it. And think for yourself. How many Muslims are out there who reject what we deem to be very clearly established things from the religion, yet we don't make takfir of them even after debating them and showing them proofs? So that's kind of where Ibn Taymiyyah is coming from, even when it comes to this subject of unknowingly engaging in actions of major shirk. Now, as for Ibn Abdul Wahhab, it appears, wallahu a'lam, that what truly mattered when it came to the specific issue was whether the evidence was provided clearly or not. Full stop. And so if the person rejected the evidence, takfir would apply. So even though Ibn Abdul Wahhab did believe in excusing people for their ignorance, even in the matters of shirk, he did not go as far as Ibn Taymiyyah in terms of how he extended that excuse to people. So that's the first difference between Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab. They differed on how far they were each willing to go in terms of extending the excuse of ignorance to those who committed major shirk. However, out of fairness, it must be pointed out that some have argued that it's difficult to compare and contrast between Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab, on this issue, because Ibn Taymiyyah, they argue, was speaking in generalities as a jurist and theologian, as opposed to speaking in the capacity of somebody with authority, such as a judge who could issue rulings of takfir on individual people. While Ibn Abdul Wahhab, on the other hand, had power and authority. Some have tried to counter this by saying that Ibn Taymiyyah didn't seek to have al-Bakri killed when al-Bakri got in trouble with the authorities, but that's not a very convincing argument, since al-Bakri was wanted by the authorities for an unrelated issue. And it wouldn't have been just for Ibn Taymiyyah to seek his killing for something he wasn't formally arrested or wanted by the authorities for. So these are just some points to consider, as this is an ongoing in-house Athari debate. A second possible difference between Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab, and I say possible because researchers have reached different conclusions on this point, but a second possible difference is that Ibn Taymiyyah did not consider going to a person's grave and calling out to that person near his grave, not from far away, but near his grave, and asking the dead to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant such and such not asking the dead themselves to grant such and such, but rather asking the dead to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant such and such favors. Ibn Taymiyyah did not consider this specific form of saint invocation to be major shirk. This is very important. We cannot extrapolate. We cannot extrapolate from this that Ibn Taymiyyah deemed all sorts of saint veneration and invocation to be minor shirk. As long as the person didn't intend to worship the saints. No, that is absolutely and 100% false. We are just speaking about this specific form of saint invocation. As for Ibn Abdul Wahhab, researchers have differed as to whether he deemed this particular scenario of saint invocation to also be an act of major shirk. So the difference of opinion must be noted, and it's up to each person to decide what he thinks is the stronger opinion. But assuming that Ibn Abdul Wahhab did believe that this is major shirk, this does not mean that Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab had dramatically different usuli or foundational conceptions of ibadah. They didn't. Rather, they differed in terms of their ruling on this specific form of saint veneration and invocation. As for calling out to the dead and asking them themselves, even by believing that it's done with the permission of Allah, to grant you favors and whatnot, both Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab were in agreement that this is a major act of shirk. And again, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab are not the only ones to deem such saint veneration and invocation, to be major shirk. It is the official stance of the Hanbali madhab, and that doesn't change even with Dr. Yasir Qadhi's attempt to cite a few solitary opinions from adherents to that madhab. The official stance of the madhab aligns with Ibn Taymiyyah's stance. As many notable authorities cite him and agree with him. Now, some people try to get creative, when it comes to the statement of Ibn Taymiyyah, which Hanbali scholars cite in agreement, and they try to interpret the statement in a way which makes it sound like Ibn Taymiyyah only believed that those who think their saints are independent of God have committed shirk. And it's that understanding which all those Hanbali scholars are agreeing with. What these people fail to understand is that these Hanbali scholars are not merely relying on one single statement of Ibn Taymiyyah. They have studied everything that he said on the subject, and they are understanding the statement which they relay from him in alignment with everything else which he said on the subject. So it's an act of desperation to isolate this single statement of Ibn Taymiyyah and try to make it seem like it's saying something else. For crying out loud, Ibn Taymiyyah said in explicit terms that the kind of shirk which the Prophet ﷺ fought the polytheists over was rampant among people claiming to be Muslims during his time. What do you think he's talking about? He's not talking about people who intended to worship another god, because if that's what he thought they were saying, he would have declared them apostates. Rather, they were engaged in actions that they didn't think were major shirk, yet in reality were. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah excused them for their ignorance, despite deeming their actions, to constitute major shirk. Ibn Taymiyyah would not have excused them if he thought that they were saying that their saints are independent of God. He wouldn't. He would have obviously declared them, he would have made takfir of them individually. Dr. Yasir Qadhi, said, read Ibn Taymiyyah's statements in Iqtida' Sirat al-Mustaqim. Okay, fine. What Ibn Taymiyyah said in Iqtida' doesn't change a thing. What we just need to make sure that we distinguish between what Ibn Taymiyyah considered to be minor shirk, namely calling out to the dead near their graves while asking them to make dua for you on your behalf, versus what he did not consider to be minor shirk, but rather major shirk, which is asking the dead themselves to help you, calling them from far away and whatnot. So we need to look at everything that he said. And you also have non-Hanbalis, such as Imam al-Dhahabi, Imam al-Razi, several Hanafi scholars, etc., all pretty much saying the same thing. The references are all out there, and again, it's extremely important to bear in mind that there are different forms of saint veneration and invocation, which scholars could differ on in terms of their ruling, right? So, but that does not necessarily mean that they had completely different paradigms or conceptions of ibadah. It's very possible to agree on an asl, or on a foundational principle, yet differ when it comes to application. Some people don't like that idea. Okay, they say, "Hey, look, when it comes to tawheed and shirk, things must be black and white." And as nice as that sounds, reality states otherwise. There will always be gray areas. I mean, why do certain Islamic sects accuse those who affirm attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why do they accuse them of shirk? Well, because in their mind, affirming multiple attributes for Allah, in their mind, entails attributing eternality to other than Allah. Why do certain Islamic groups believe that belief in secondary causes could entail shirk? Well, because they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only musabbib. He is the only real cause of things, not merely the ultimate cause of things, but rather the only real and the real cause and doer of things. Why do scholars differ over what is an unconditional and conditional act of ibadah, etc.? So the differences are there, and we need to acknowledge them. And another thing we need to bear in mind is that not everybody who says that in invoking the dead or invoking the saints is permissible or recommended, not all of them necessarily have the same conception or foundational understanding of ibadah. For example, you have some that say that invoking the saints to grant you your requests isn't shirk, because unless you believe that the person is helping you independently of God, well, that doesn't amount to ibadah. But others who do believe in saint veneration don't necessarily agree with that logic. If we take Ibn Hajar al-Haytami or Imam al-Subki, for example, both of these great Shafi'i jurists, took the opinion that calling out to the dead, or calling out to saints, is not problematic. So, for example, if you were to say something like, "Oh Abdul Qadir, help me," they wouldn't find that to be problematic. Why? Well, because linguistically speaking, it's possible that by the phrase "help me," what is really intended is, "Oh Abdul Qadir, ask Allah to help me," or help me have Allah help me. And Ibn Taymiyyah saw that there was a linguistic leeway there, and as a result, relegated the severity of the act to minor shirk because there was a ta'wil. So here, Imam al-Subki was not necessarily advocating this line of reasoning that ibadah cannot take effect unless you believe the person you're asking is independent of God. That's not the reasoning at play here. However, still, when it came to other phrases like "Oh Abdul Qadir, grant me a child," here, Ibn Taymiyyah did not accept this linguistic excuse. He did not believe that this could be passed off linguistically as meaning, "Oh, Abdul Qadir, ask Allah to grant me a child." As he believed that the language did not accommodate such a method of speaking, and argued that such phraseology was still shirky phraseology. But obviously, in his mind, Ibn Taymiyyah deemed his opponents to be sincerely incorrect and extended the excuse of ignorance to them as well. And look, there are different reasons and arguments for why that people use when they promote saint veneration. They also have various theological presuppositions that Salafis or Ash'ari or Atharis, whatever you want to call them, do not agree with. So, for instance, you have the doctrine of occasionalism, where secondary causes are not affirmed and cause and effect relationships aren't truly real. That's not something Atharis agree with. It's not even something that most laymen agree with. Yet there are those who adopt that doctrine, and in light of that doctrine, could try to argue and have tried to argue that asking the dead to heal you and grant you children and whatnot isn't really shirk, since it's not really they who are granting you and helping you. You also have people who disagree with Atharis on certain matters related to prophetology, nubuwat. I mean, particularly when it comes to prophetic miracles and karamat. And they think that the righteous in their graves are alive and are blessed with these abilities to help and assist people by the permission of Allah. And there are a host of other reasons for why people advance these sorts of pro-saint veneration arguments. And Ibn Taymiyyah recognized all this, and he deemed that these people were sincerely confused and ignorant. He believed that in reality, even if they were unaware that their actions in reality amounted to major shirk, yet he saw that they were ignorant and excused them on account of it. Let me just have a sip of water. Before moving on to the next point, I'd like to quickly comment on an argument which Dr. Yasir Qadhi raised. Now, this concerns Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Now, Dr. Yasir Qadhi argued that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Prophet Isa alayhi salam the power to raise the dead, the power to resurrect the dead. And Dr. Yasir said, let us imagine that a Muslim during the time of Prophet Isa alayhi salam asked him to raise somebody from the dead while believing that he could only do so by the permission of Allah. Dr. Qadhi argues that this is not shirk akbar, but if there were somebody who made the same exact request in the same exact manner, yet believed that Prophet Isa alayhi salam was God, then the act becomes one of shirk. First of all, there are a number of points to consider here. first of all, when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Prophet Isa alayhi salam the power to resurrect the dead, what do we mean by that exactly? Do we mean that he gave him full discretional authority to raise from the dead whoever, whenever, wherever, and as many as he wished, all with the permission and oversight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is this some kind of partial and restricted ability to raise some of the dead only in some specific circumstances in order to prove his prophethood with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Another question we need to ask ourselves here is the action of resurrecting the dead one which is exclusive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it from the khasa'is al-rububiyyah? Is this something which only Allah himself does? Well, many ulama thought so. They do not believe that Prophet Isa alayhi salam acquired an ability to resurrect the dead. Rather, they believe that he was merely used as a means or as a cause to perform certain actions and gestures, and in that point and instant would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervene and resurrect the dead himself. So for example, Prophet Isa alayhi salam would approach the grave and say, "Rise," and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that instant would resurrect the dead himself, not Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Imam al-Tabari even said that the dead were resurrected when Prophet Isa alayhi salam would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have the dead resurrected, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself would resurrect the dead. So there's a big difference here. There's a big difference between saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrected the dead himself by using Isa alayhi salam as a means, versus saying that Isa alayhi salam was given the ability and power to raise the dead himself, and with the oversight and permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think Dr. Yasir Qadhi needs to interact with these opinions and make himself clearer as to what he believes. Does he believe that resurrecting the dead is something exclusive to Allah only if done so independently? And if yes, does he believe the same thing for other things like forgiveness of sins, granting hidayah, etc.? And how do we know that Prophet Isa alayhi salam was even given this discretional ability and authority, as opposed to the explanation offered by so many other ulama? And which classical ulama did agree with Dr. Yasir Qadhi, and why is his stance stronger than the others? So that would be good to know, so that we could assess the strengths of the differing opinions. And but since Dr. Yasir Qadhi promised to not have a back and forth, we might not find out. Moreover, how is Dr. Yasir Qadhi going? How far is he going to go here? So let's say that Prophet Isa alayhi salam is alive and still has this unconditional ability to resurrect the dead with the permission of Allah. And someone is constantly calling out to him, slaughtering for him, to appease him, and making sujood out of mere respect, not worship, but out of respect, and fasting for him, and doing everything for him without intending worship, and pleading to him to raise his dead mother back to life. This does not amount in a collective and holistic sense to major shirk committed by an ignoramus in the eyes of Dr. Yasir Qadhi? Or am I missing something in the hypothetical scenarios he's providing? All in all, I believe Dr. Yasir Qadhi's argument requires a little more work to be put into it before we permit it to make us reconsider to radically reconsider changing our conception of ibadah. Now, there's so much to say, and I can say a lot, and this video is already becoming way longer than I would like it to be. So let me give you some homework, I guess. Now, Dr. Qadhi mentioned Dr. Sultan al-Umayri in his video, and he spoke positively about him and the kinds of arguments he uses. And that's good, because others are not so fair when it comes to how they speak of Dr. Sultan. Now, Dr. Sultan has authored a book called تحقيق الإفادة بتحرير مفهوم العبادة. And the book, which alhamdulillah, yours truly had the honor and privilege of contributing to, has one primary goal, namely refuting those who say that in order for ibadah to take place, one must believe that his object of veneration and glorification has the attribute of self-sufficiency, of true independence of God's will. And the book, alhamdulillah, refutes this understanding. And even though Dr. Yasir Qadhi doesn't appear to be fully embracing this understanding, based on some of the remarks that he made, the book still pretty much also addresses most of the arguments that Dr. Yasir Qadhi used in support of his stance, especially when it comes to the ayat that Dr. Qadhi mentioned and his analysis of what the Quraysh believed and so on. So, make sure you read it, please, because I don't want to tackle the beliefs of Quraysh in this video, because that would, quite frankly, just add another hour or an hour and a half to this video. And if you're a serious researcher, inshallah, you will read and investigate yourself. If you cannot read Arabic, since the book is only available in Arabic, you have a number of choices. One is ask your local sheikh to read the book and teach it to you, or ask a teacher that you look up to study the book and to teach it to you and your friends. Another thing you could do is maybe wait for the English translation of the book to come out. Maybe, inshallah, the English translation of the book might come out this year, or maybe next year, tops, inshallah. I'm supposed to be proofreading it, but I'm still not sure when it will be made available, so I don't want to promise, but inshallah, maybe this year. Another thing that you could do, and this is the least ideal thing, but it's better than nothing, you could check out an article on my Medium page called Defining Ibadah. So you could go to Google and type Bassam Zawadi Defining Ibadah Medium. So Bassam Zawadi Defining Ibadah Medium. And inshallah, you should be able to find it. In it, I try to summarize some of the key foundational ideas of the book, and it does not do complete justice to the book, since it is the book which provides all the citations and addresses each of the arguments in detail. But nevertheless, the principles which I summarize in the article could prove beneficial, inshallah, to several of you. So do check it out if you're unable to read Arabic. And also for you Arabic readers, do keep a lookout for Dr. Sultan al-Umayri's upcoming roughly 1800-page sharh of Kitab al-Tawheed, which inshallah might be published this year or next. In it, he discusses this topic in greater detail, and discusses when conditional acts of ibadah, such as slaughtering, seeking refuge, istighatha, etc., constitute ibadah. Now, with that said, I'd like to move on and and cover a few other points in Dr. Yasir Qadhi's video. He spoke about the harms. He spoke about the harms of focusing on the problems of other Muslims. Okay? And how we need to think about matters of greater priority to the ummah and whatnot. Now, it's important to realize that your perception of something heavily depends on how you frame that thing. So let's imagine this. Let's imagine that you have a bunch of Muslims who are drinking alcohol, and someone is constantly reminding them and urging them not to do so. Now, how could you frame this situation? Now, you could either say, Now, you could either say, the brother is giving them nasiha. Say, okay, mashallah, giving nasiha is good. That sounds like a good thing. Or you could say, the brother is trying to eliminate the munkar with his tongue. He is trying to use his speech to bring about the end of the munkar of alcohol drinking. Once again, mashallah, that sounds like the brother is following the prophetic command on this point. Or you could say that the brother is too focused on the problems of other Muslims. Now, that doesn't sound so nice, now does it? Now, the question here is, how should things be framed when we are discussing our differences with others when it comes to the conception of ibadah? Now, if you, the Athari, truly believe that there are acts of major shirk being ignorantly practiced in the ummah, do you feel that you should, with wisdom and good conduct, of course, an extremely exceptionally important caveat that should not be undermined, do you feel that you should warn others about this? Or do you want to rest your mind and sleep easy at night and not think too much about it and live and let live? Something which Dr. Yasir Qadhi is urging you all to do. Do you think it's an exaggeration on your part to warn others about these practices? Or do you agree with your scholars who say that these acts are one of the worst innovations in our ummah? You make up your minds after you've determined what your stance is on the matter. Now, Dr. Yasir Qadhi said that there are other issues affecting the ummah, and there are, and he's right. It's wrong to neglect them, but it's also wrong to neglect this issue if you believe it's a serious issue. The solution is not to call people to neglect things which we personally feel are not of immediate importance, but rather that we all collectively ensure that we do not restrict our efforts to only dealing with certain problems, that the ummah is facing, at the expense of letting other problems go unattended to. Now, not every single one of us could address all the problems in the ummah, and we need to look. We need to take a good look at the state of the ummah and to look at our own ilmi interests and our own skill sets and ask ourselves, how can I best serve the ummah? What problems is the ummah facing where there is a dearth of attention being put into their remedy? What academic or social or whatever skills do I have which could best serve the ummah? And once you've answered those questions for yourself and prayed istikhara, well, inshallah, you've pretty much found your calling. So pursue it. And another point that I would like to address is Dr. Yasir Qadhi's claim that Athari beliefs regarding saint veneration and invocation being major acts of shirk are dangerous. He also did not make any distinction between those Atharis who make excuses of ignorance for the actor engaging in these acts and those who do not. He didn't differentiate between any kind of Athari. Regardless, according to Dr. Yasir Qadhi, just believing that the saint veneration performed by those claiming to be Muslims is major shirk is dangerous. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that Sheikh Yasir Qadhi does not intend Atharis any harm with these words. And, I know he does not intend Atharis any harm with those words, but I urge him to not use such vocabulary for what is a common belief amongst all members of a Muslim group, especially given the kind of climate we are in and how several enemies of Islam out there with harmful agendas against Muslims could and would happily use his words for harmful purposes against Atharis. I pray, inshallah, that he's more wary of the descriptive labels he's using here. When Dr. Yasir Qadhi uses terms like ISIS and wala'u bara and takfir in the same sentence, again, I pray, because of the climate we are in, that he is more careful about how we discuss these terms. I'm not saying that he's not entitled to put forth his argument if that's what he truly believes, but these are the sorts of things that people are better off writing rather than expressing verbally and spontaneously off the cuff, because when we write, we tend to express ourselves much more carefully. Now, with that out of the way, I just want to go back to the original point. Is the Athari belief that these acts of saint veneration and invocation being major shirk dangerous? Well, many ideas could be quite dangerous when they are applied recklessly and foolishly by ignoramuses who have no wisdom, have no sense of masalih wa mafasid, no sense of harms and benefits that could come out of their actions, have no respect for the rule of law, have no understanding of fiqh, etc. Let's ask another question. Is the idea that there is a punishment for the one who insults the Prophet ﷺ, is that a dangerous idea? We've seen how in certain countries, how there have been unruly mobs who have engaged in vigilante killings of people that they've accused of insulting the Prophet ﷺ. Now, is the opinion regarding the punishment for the one who insults the Prophet ﷺ, which is firmly established in the juristic madahib, is it a dangerous opinion because it has been misused to shed blood? How about the juristic opinion that the one who abandons the prayer without an excuse is a kafir? Is that dangerous? Should we erase it from the books of fiqh? Should we warn against those who adopt that opinion? How about the claim of Imam al-Nawawi in his Rawdat al-Talibin when he states that those who do not declare Christians to be kuffar or even have doubts that Christians are kuffar are themselves kuffar, even if they claim to be Muslims? Well, in our era of ignorance, there are many Muslims in countries like Syria, Egypt, Pakistan, and other countries that do not say that the Christians and Jews are kuffar. They say, no, they're not kuffar, they're Ahlul Kitab. They don't even know what a kafir is. I have direct family members that say that. Should we declare them kuffar? Should I do so at my next family reunion? Is the statement of Imam al-Nawawi a dangerous statement? Look, I can give hundreds of examples here. And the point I'm trying to make here is clear. If it is up to the person whether he wants to isolate these statements and stances and totally ignore everything else that scholarship has to say, and then go ahead and do something reckless and senseless. Alhamdulillah, the vast majority of Atharis are law-abiding people who understand that very well. And I pray, inshallah, that Dr. Yasir Qadhi is a bit more careful with his choice of words. He wants to go after ISIS, go right ahead. But please don't label the beliefs of all Atharis as dangerous just like that. Especially when we are already having plenty of antagonistic enemies already trying to do that. Now, when it comes to Ibn Abdul Wahhab and the charges of extreme chain takfir and allegations of war crimes being perpetrated and whatnot, for me, with the relatively little I've read from both sides, I was personally not able to comfortably, definitively, and holistically choose a single side in this debate. And that will frustrate many people who have. And wallahi al-azim, I swear, it's not my intention to frustrate anybody. Look, you speak to a sympathizer and defender of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, and you see what he has to say. His perspective is, Ibn Abdul Wahhab and his followers were preaching peacefully, and they were harassed and kicked out of towns and had rulings of takfir and tabdi' issued against them. They were incited against. There were calls to have them killed. They were attacked first, and they initially fought out of self-defense. It is not true that Ibn Abdul Wahhab made takfir of most of the ummah. In fact, Ibn Abdul Wahhab has explicit statements where he said that he does not believe that the majority of the ummah are guilty of shirk. It is not true that Ibn Abdul Wahhab said that the ummah does not know the meaning of La ilaha illallah. Rather, he was only referring to a specific region, the region of Arid, which was a part of Najd, and in particular reference to the Bedouins, and there are other statements from non-Najdis which confirm just how bad and rampant deviancy was in the region. Ibn Abdul Wahhab and his followers attacked towns which reneged on their peace treaty with them and sought to kill their preachers, and they used their towns as political centers of resistance against him and his followers. They had no choice but to expand and grow militarily, because it was necessary for them to gain strength and solidify their borders, and because they knew that if they didn't do that, that they would eventually be crushed and eliminated, etc., etc., etc. Those are the kinds of arguments sympathizers and defenders of Ibn Abdul Wahhab put forth. And then the other side speaks, and they say things like, Ibn Abdul Wahhab was a takfiri. He was causing fitna. Of course he should have been resisted against, because he was a Kharijite. That's what you do to Kharijites. You resist them and you fight them. He was absolutely intolerant. He not only did he make takfir of so many people, he even made takfir of people who did not agree with his takfir of those people. Him and his followers committed war crimes. They massacred Muslims. They took their women, Muslim women, they took them as captives. He attacked Muslim cities and towns unprovoked. He did not merely hold a controversial opinion. He gained military strength and put his thoughts into destructive practice, which led to great shedding of Muslim blood. And over what? Over something that's not even considered major shirk to begin with, etc., etc., etc. And those are the kinds of things you'd hear a critic of Ibn Abdul Wahhab say. Tens of thousands of pages have been authored by both sides arguing their case. You're dealing with something in the past, and you're not seeing with your own eyes everything that went down. Now, I'm not going to dedicate hundreds of hours of my research time to this issue. As Dr. Yasir Qadhi himself said, there are other priorities in the ummah worth investing our time in. This is not it for me. My personal theological beliefs will not change one bit, regardless of the outcome of any research I decide to pursue on this subject. I will not engage in chain takfir, whether or not I find out that this is what Ibn Abdul Wahhab did. And I will most certainly not go out and start killing people, even if I find out that this is what Ibn Abdul Wahhab did. My iman and theological madhab is not interlinked with the actions of individual fallible men. I'm interested in ideas and concepts, and I encourage you and urge you all to think the same way. Similarly, I will not defend what Ibn Abdul Wahhab and his followers did blindly, nor will I throw the baby out with the bathwater. I will suffice by saying that if the truth of the matter is that Ibn Abdul Wahhab committed chain takfir and had women and children killed, then I condemn him and his actions. If that is the truth, then I condemn him. But again, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Ibn Abdul Wahhab's moral character and military and political decisions is one thing, and his notion of takfir is another thing, and his conception of ibadah is another thing, and his ruling of certain actions to be ibadah or shirk is another thing altogether. I do adopt Ibn Taymiyyah's stance that invoking the dead from afar and asking them to fulfill your needs and whatnot is major shirk. This is the belief of every single Athari, from the most strict and extreme down to the most lenient and mild. This is a belief that virtually all Atharis agree on, and people will need to deal with that, and they would need to come to grips with that. Moreover, I do believe that an Islamic state would have the responsibility to eradicate, and with force, if need be, such ugly practices. So I will not mince my words on this point. Even if I did not believe that these practices were major shirk and were merely haram, I still believe as a matter of principle that open and despicable practices of munkar, such as asking the dead themselves to fulfill your needs, this should be eradicated by force by an Islamically governed state. And obviously, as it does so, we would expect it to weigh the masalih and mafasid of such a move, because Muslim blood is not to be taken lightly. And I believe that there are very good arguments from the Qur'an and Sunnah, backed up by the practices of the companions and the Salaf, to support that stance. This is a serious issue. One cannot request an Athari to just live and let live when it comes to this issue. But is this not a huge impediment for the different Islamic groups to fully embrace each other? It is. It sure is. But which side should compromise? Should the side that believes it's shirk compromise, or should the side that doesn't even believe it's fard to invoke dead saints compromise by putting an end to this practice? Is it more fair to ask the side to tolerate something as a valid difference of opinion when in their minds that something is undoubtedly evil? Or is it more fair to ask the side which doesn't even think it's haram to end this practice, to end this practice? If the call to unity and embracing each other is truly sincere, then let the side which compromises far less extend an olive branch and do what's required from their end. Otherwise, we're just going to remain stuck in this little deadlock here. And I guess in a way that's fine, as it's technically possible to coexist peacefully and cooperate, but that tension will undoubtedly remain. So, back to Ibn Abdul Wahhab. In a nutshell, do your own research. Or don't do your own research. It's your choice. My advice is that, as a priority, stick to researching ideas and notions, not people, most especially if it's going to take hundreds of hours of your time to do justice to researching those issues. Reading every rebuttal and counter rebuttal and reading all the sources and verifying whether the sources are reliably attributed to their authors and reading the different studies and conclusions reached by different people and weighing the strengths and weaknesses of each stance. That's going to take a lot of time. And if you don't even know Arabic, you're probably not even going to be able to do all that properly. And that's even assuming that you're going to come out of all this with a definitive conclusion. And if you do decide to research the subject, then don't merely look at what transpired, but also examine the events through a juristic and theological lens to determine what actions, to determine what actions committed were definitely wrong, definitely right, or what was opening to differing viewpoints. And that's referring to both sides. Ibn Abdul Wahhab and his opponents, who weren't necessarily angelic in their behavior, by the way. Don't let anybody try to guilt trip you or make you feel like you're immoral. And this is a message to the Atharis listening. Don't let anybody try to guilt trip you or make you feel like you're immoral just because you're not casting negative moral judgments on Ibn Abdul Wahhab. You're not obliged in the Sharia to hold any stance about any fallible man, especially when it requires an extreme level of effort to do so. At the same time, again, this is advice directed to Atharis, do make sure that you don't defend Ibn Abdul Wahhab blindly either, especially if you haven't done sufficient research. It works both ways. Don't appear before Allah on the Day of Judgment possibly having to answer for why you defended oppressive actions. Watch out for yourself. Stick to ideas and concepts. Now, the final point which I would like to discuss is Dr. Yasir Qadhi himself. I'd like to read out something to all of you. It's something which Dr. Yasir Qadhi himself said in one of his classes. Sorry, let me just have a sip of water. It's something that Dr. Yasir Qadhi said in one of his classes. Listen carefully to this. And I quote, "You know when somebody moves on, it's human nature. You look at the murtads that leave Islam and you find them always talking about Islam. And to a certain level, it applies to anybody, including myself. that leaves a group and you feel a sense of hurt and pain. And I'll tell you why. Because you feel a sense of betrayal. You're like, man, I believed in all this. So there is a sense of anger. And I can recognize this even as my blood boils. You see, subhanAllah, the academic side of me and the human side of me are clashing right now. I can see my own irritation at the movement I used to be part of for 20 years because I feel betrayed. That how could they have taught me this? And that irritation comes out. Anybody who is with a movement, any Christian who leaves Christianity, any Muslim who leaves Islam, any Sufi who leaves Sufism, any Najdi who leaves Najdiism, you can't help but feel a little bit extra angry at the movement you were with. And that's why I need to always keep myself in check. And again, try to be as unbiased as possible. End quote. Now, and I guess from this point on in the video, I think my remarks are mostly directed to Atharis, to the Atharis listening to me. As you can see, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is trying to deal with his past. He is bottling up feelings of resentment against the Athari school. He is angry. He feels betrayed. He feels hurt. He feels pain. This is not my psychological analysis of him. This is what he says of himself. Now, those negative sentiments of Dr. Yasir Qadhi would obviously correspond to the newly acquired perception he has of the Athari school. He's trying his best to appear neutral and to appear like this isn't an issue that's bothering him that much anymore, but it clearly is. And he said what he said just about a year ago. So this isn't an old statement of his. And you, the Atharis, are just going to have to expect that Dr. Yasir Qadhi will not stop criticizing your school. No matter how many times he tells everybody that we shouldn't be discussing these polemical issues, he himself will continue to periodically and frequently discuss these issues as he has been doing for the past decade since he left Atharism. Now, he himself, as I quoted him, compared himself to a murtad who leaves Islam and can't escape the shadows of his past. Many murtads, after leaving Islam, are defined by their past. Ex-Muslim. That's their identity. Their past defines them. And it appears to be the same for Dr. Yasir Qadhi. He is that ex-Salafi. Others who have left Atharism and joined other schools are not like that. There are many people who have left Atharism and they've really moved on emotionally and intellectually. Atharism didn't work for them. They found something else they feel works for them and they moved on. It's not a mission in their lives to warn people about the great evil Salafi school. They've really moved on. No negative sentiments, no feelings of betrayal and anger. They've moved on. But Dr. Yasir Qadhi still hasn't. And there are many others out there like him. So you Atharis need to bear this in mind. And so I guess what I'm really trying to say is this. Unless Dr. Yasir Qadhi brings up a new argument, which is worthy of a rebuttal, there's really no need to react each time he repeats the same talking points. Especially on this subject. Because Dr. Yasir Qadhi's arguments on this subject are virtually a copy-paste from those from other sects whom your ulama have been responding to all these decades. We literally could identify the books and authors that where he took these arguments from. But when they're presented by somebody like Dr. Yasir Qadhi, these arguments have the illusion of appearing novel. Look, Dr. Yasir Qadhi was an ardent Athari. He was a passionate Athari. He strongly believed in the cause. Those who studied with him in Medina testify that he was overly involved in refutation culture, overly involved in refuting other theological groups. He was even trying to seek fatawa from mashayikh like Sheikh Abdullah al-Ghunayman and Ibn al-Uthaymin, rahimahullah, to refute Ash'aris, only to be advised that it was best to teach the people the foundations of their religion and the foundations of their creed. So he was that passionate Athari, overly concerned with refuting Islamic sects. Dr. Yasir Qadhi himself also informed us that he was quite the confrontational person, and that might have possibly led to his feelings of alienation as he was passionately and assertively propagating his views. And as a result, a growing number of people perhaps distanced themselves from him. And that kind of prodded him to investigate his beliefs and moved on to something else. But he didn't move on to another theological school like Ash'ariism or Maturidism. He's kind of without a theological madhab now, where he takes important elements from here and important elements from there. He's neither here, he's neither there. Many have seen how Sheikh Yasir Qadhi evolved after attending Yale. His threshold of tolerance of differing views is much wider than any Sunni theological school would allow. For example, this isn't the biggest example, but for example, he says our differences with the Mu'tazila on the issue of sifat is down to linguistics and how we express ourselves. Any Athari or Ash'ari or Maturidi theologian would scoff at such a strange and evidently false conclusion. And sifat is supposed to be Dr. Yasir Qadhi's area of specialization. Dr. Yasir Qadhi compares himself to Ibn Aqil al-Hanbali before he repented. Ibn Aqil was charged by his fellow Hanbalis for praising al-Hallaj and for being affected by Mu'tazilite thought. Dr. Yasir Qadhi praised Ibn Aqil as a forward-thinking Hanbali because he was brave enough to oppose his fellow traditionalist Hanbalis before they forced him to repent. Why would Dr. Yasir Qadhi compare himself to somebody like Ibn Aqil al-Hanbali before he repented? Out of all people you could compare yourself to and aspire to emulate, is that who you see yourself to be like? It's not that Dr. Yasir Qadhi is saying that he's sympathetic to al-Hallaj and i'tizal. No, of course not. But the idea of being this loner opposing the rest of the traditionalists, he feels that. Why feel that way? Dr. Yasir Qadhi in his video said that one of the things that encouraged him to reinvestigate his beliefs was that he was curious as to why his views were held by a minority in the 21st century. Well, at least when Dr. Yasir Qadhi was an Athari, he was part of an established school with its respected scholars and institutions and masajid and whatnot. Now he appears to have adopted no recognizable theological school and appears to be fine with opposing everybody else by having adopted a customized, packaged selection of stances. So will that now consistently encourage him to do another self-introspection as to whether what he's upon today true or not? Time will tell. And inshallah, I pray that he at the very least gets the emotional closure that he's seeking. And I think there are lessons to be learned from the mistakes Dr. Yasir Qadhi committed back in his Athari days. Not every Athari is the kind of Athari Dr. Yasir Qadhi used to be. We should not allow the personal experiences of a single individual be projected on to everybody else. But we could and should learn from the mistakes that he committed. And this brings me to my final point, and just to bring this entire thing to a close, we need to acknowledge the valid points which Dr. Yasir Qadhi raised in his video. Regarding displaying hostility towards others, absolutely refusing to cooperate with others, neglecting other extremely important causes in the ummah. All of these things are valid points which Dr. Yasir Qadhi raised in his video. Atharis, Atharis need, and the advice goes to the other groups as well, but because I'm an Athari myself, I'm directing this to Atharis. Atharis need to contextualize all those narrations about the Salaf's treatment of innovators. Boycotting and shunning served certain purposes back then, and they were effective during a time when the falsehood of the innovators was virtually clear to everybody, and the innovators numbered so few. With all the noise regarding the Jahmis, they only numbered in the few hundreds, tops. But when you're not that majority anymore, you need to assess whether the maqasid of boycotting and shunning are being actualized each time and each place, and with each group or set of individuals you plan to do that to. The purpose and wisdom of engaging in these actions has to be assessed on a periodical basis. As opposed to just blindly reading what the Salaf did and completely ignoring the maqasid they were hoping to acquire as a result of their boycotting and shunning. They did it to become stronger and to curtail the spreading of deviancy. They didn't do it to isolate themselves from the rest of the ummah. There are very precious statements to consider in this regard, from the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah and from more recent scholars like Sheikh al-Albani rahimahullah, and Sheikh, in his Silsilat al-Huda wal-Nur, and Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd and others. And cooperation could happen without compromising your beliefs. It could also happen without validating the beliefs of those whom you wish to cooperate with on specific matters in specific instances. However, if the price tag is, if the price tag of cooperating with anybody is the compromise of your cherished stance, then don't cooperate with him. And unfortunately, there are people like that. They want you to compromise. They want you to change your beliefs. They pretend to validate your theological school only to keep attacking it. Their idea of unity with you is that you stop believing in some of the core things you believe in, and then we'll get along. Watch out from these people. They outwardly claim they seek unity, but what they really have in mind is trying to change your beliefs a bit more diplomatically and slyly. They want to have the reputation that they are open-minded and against sectarianism, and that they frown upon all these polemical theological debates, only to engage in these very debates and discussions themselves. Watch out from these people, especially burnouts who just don't know how to psychologically move on in a mentally healthy manner after having left Atharism. The kind of people you want to cooperate with are those who are openly honest about where they stand in their perspective of you and your school, and yet are willing to cooperate with you on specific matters on the condition that neither compromises their beliefs. Cooperate with these people in that which is good, as the Qur'an commands. This isn't my personal logic here. The major ulama of the Salafi, of the Athari or Salafi school have spoken to that effect. So, subhanAllah, there's a lot to say on this specific subject of cooperation with others. It's worthy of an entire separate lecture itself. But, and I don't wish to prolong this message any further. So, in a nutshell, try your best to be balanced and don't burn yourself out, and don't stick to one issue and cause in your life. Think beyond your madhab. Think about the broader ummah, and always assess priorities as they constantly change. And I pray, inshallah, that the ummah grows to become more united in its ranks, despite the differences which will remain in it, and that we move together to better times, inshallah. And with this we conclude. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.